Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the debut album from Wolf Alice, titled My Love Is Cool. So I mentioned a couple of times, mostly on Billboard Breakdown, that rock radio basically irrelevant to the mainstream pop charts these days, at least in terms of defining larger trends. Yes, there are rock songs that are big, that might even do well in the charts, but rock music doesn't tend to go viral in the same way that a hip-hop track or a pop song can, or mutate at the same rate that country currently is. And part of that is because rock doesn't grip the popular consciousness in the same way that it has throughout other decades, like the 70s or the 90s, to the point where the rock songs that take the charts are so wildly different that it's hard to pin down a distinctive sound that it might have. When I look at the top 10 rock songs on the charts right now on the rock charts, 3 are folk with the barest hint of rock music, 3 are outright pop rock, 1 is closer to soul or blues than actual rock music. Doesn't make Hosier any less awesome, but it is true. And Shut Up and Dance by Walk the Moon would have been called new wave synth pop 30 years ago. Of the 2 remaining, 1 is Muse's Dead Inside, and I'd be stretching to say that its sour brand of electronic rock with emo lyrics is anything close to quality, and the other is Believe by Mumford & Sons, and it's just terrible. And that's it. No metal, no punk, nothing even close to grunge or post-grunge or hardcore, and God help you if you're looking for one of the subgenres. But what I see when I look at the rock charts is no clear direction and nothing resembling hierarchies or leaders, except maybe the Foo Fighters out of sheer longevity and respect in the industry at this point. Mostly because rock is becoming a catch-all for whatever has a guitar and is too rough-edged for pop radio or too heavy for country, and sometimes not even that. And I'm not saying that I want rock to be monochromatic or dominated by any one sound. I lived through post-grunge in the 2000s. I don't want that again. But I get no sense of defined identity when I look at rock radio. And this has been an issue for a good couple of years now, and that's worrisome. It looks a lot less like diversity at this point and more like people just throwing whatever they've got at the wall until something might stick. And let me stress, this is an American issue. Us Canadians, we never really marginalized rock radio in the same way. And the indie folk rock boom is pretty solidly entrenched up here. It's not going away, and honestly, that's a good thing. Doesn't seem like a bad direction for the United States to go in either. At least indie rock is more colorful and interesting than most, and there's plenty of upstart acts looking to break into the scene. Case in point, Wolf Alice, a UK-based band that started off in the poppier side of the indie folk scene before drifting towards heavier, grunge-inspired instrumentation and signed to the same label as the 1975. Good sign, I like that band. Like Mr. Wives, they spent the last year building a lot of buzz, and now have dropped a debut album that's come very highly recommended from a couple other critics. So I took a look at My Love Is Cool. Do we have our new indie rock leaders or titans here? Honestly, I doubt it, and I honestly kind of hope that doesn't happen. And throughout the first 4 or 5 listens to this record, I got so little from this Wolf Alice debut that really gripped me in any way. It reminded me in a bizarre way of that last album from Walk the Moon, Talking Is Hard, is that the obvious influences overshadowed any unique or distinctive elements that it might have. But whereas that album at least had some killer singles like Shut Up and Dance, My Love Is Cool just fell completely flat for me. And if it hadn't been for a couple more re-listens, I would have torn this record to shreds. As it is, it's an album with some interesting intentions, but nowhere close to the proper execution in order to pull any of them off. So where to even start with this? Well, for one, it's the big question of what this album is trying to do instrumentally. And the best way that I can kind of describe it is if someone tried to fuse modern indie pop tropes, especially in calling back to the minimalist, percussion-driven, reverb saturation like a band like the XX, and mid-90s grunge and alternative music, we're calling it a Smashing Pumpkins, Alanis Morissette, Garbage, and especially Hole. Now, in principle, I can see the intentions behind it. It could work with a loud, soft dynamic or striking contrast. Heavier percussion could intensify the groove, and Lord knows that modern rock getting heavier, that's not a bad thing. The problem pretty much across the board is the execution, especially in the production, in this case handled by early Arctic Monkeys producer Mike Crossey. Yeah, there are some good moments in capturing that grunge feel. The guitar had some sizzle on Bros, Your Love's Whore, Fluffy, especially that killer crunch in the back half of Giant Peach. It sounds almost doom metal inspired. It's one of the few times this album kicked anything close to ass. And hell, the percussion is aggressive and prominent enough to back it up as well. The first problem though comes in the bass lines, which with rare exception feel so inert and lacking in any sort of edge or texture that all that sizzle doesn't have a real foundation to it. Still good, like on the very ending of Swallowtail that reminded me a lot of 90s Jimmy Eat World, but it could have been so much better. Granted, you can say that about all the guitar production on this album, because there are so many effects that warp and hollow out the guitar groove that there's rarely any sort of organic presence. And you know what? Maybe that was for the best. best. The song Silk runs on a pretty rubbery synth and bass, and the pop minimalism is actually a good fit for these guys. Similar case with Soapy Hands if it wasn't for all the weedy gurgling all throughout the background. And that's not even touching on tracks like Freazy that feel like could have been pulled from a bad mid to late 90s teen movie soundtrack with the formulaic strings and the guitar setup. And all over this album is the reverb. Yeah, it sounds okay on the vocals, sounds pretty clean, but it doesn't work with these guitar tones. It feels way too slick to match with all that fire. And yeah, I know some of you are saying they're just trying to imitate Hole. They had a very similar kind of sound. Want to know the difference? Courtney Love actually had vocal presence and raw explosive personality. So did Billy Corgan, so did Shirley Manson. They may have used effects as well to construct their vocal personality, but their raw charisma shone through regardless. There was an edge to those songs. Whereas frontwoman Ellie Rossell, she can't seem to decide whether she wants to imitate a depressed Charlie XCX, Karen O, or any other squealing Riot Girl singer. In the last case, the added layers proves that she's just out of her depth here. She does nowhere near the rawness to back it up, and that's why they piled on all that reverb. And while her lower tones that sound a little bit more sultry are probably her best, the fact that there is so much reverb distancing her from her audience does nothing to enhance any sort of intimate, visceral punch. Joff Audie's male vocals, they're passable, and he's actually got a pretty good falsetto, but again, the reason grunge and post-grunge worked as well as it often did is that the singers could sound more raw and explosive. Piling on a cleaner sounding brand of reverb doesn't help that. It doesn't feel remotely cohesive with any of the instrumentation. It just didn't work for me. So okay, fine, can the lyrics save this record? Honestly, they're probably the element that works the best, in that the directionless teenage angst of these tracks does kind of fit some of the instrumentation. Sure, they don't have enough raw detail to stand out much in terms of any sort of storytelling, and it's something that 90s punk and emo and grunge didn't already do to death, and even with that, disaffection only works so far with me, but there is a little bit of nuance here. I like the frustrated lack of action on Giant Peach and Fluffy that screams of not having easy answers and that getting out of this town might not be that answer, or if they even can escape at all. I like the concept behind Soapy Hands as a girl who sleeps around a lot is on the verge of dead-eyed breakdown, as she realizes that she won't have the relationship or security that she wants if she keeps up on this path. Hell, if we're looking for an underlying theme of this album, it'd be that the ream of questions that drive teenage angst today, they remain unanswered, and that insecurity about the future drives songs like Silk, where our narrator seeks out a companion who might not be the best for her in any way, but what else is she supposed to do if she doesn't have any sort of guidance? Granted, not all of it works. The anthem of Cool on Freezy is just obnoxious in its reality bites-esque disaffection, and You're a Germ is too lyrically incoherent to work. A song calling out a dude exploiting a girl's naivete, but never clarifies who the pronoun you is supposed to reference throughout the chorus. If it's referring to him, why call him out as guilty as well, or mention his parents? Why would that change his behavior? Whereas if you is referring to the hapless girl here, well, why is she guilty when she's more the victim here because she's getting exploited? And it's awfully presumptuous for Wolf Alice to slam her, given that their behavior across the majority of this album. But you know what, outside of that, most of the writing's actually good enough to make me wish that we actually had singers who could deliver it with some real presence or raw energy or charisma, which we don't have on this album. Ugh, look. I don't hate My Love Is Cool. Wolf Alice had a cool idea and they clearly love 90s music, but somewhere in the production or the composition, just things went off the rails and makes this album feel like a real chore to listen through, especially considering some of the more indulgent moments, especially in the final track. It's a shame that there's seeds of a good, workable idea here, especially lyrically, but I'm not exactly a fan of either singer, especially the way they're produced, neither of whom have the presence, power, or charisma to match their influences, and with the production not helping their personalities, you run into a lot of problems. For me, this is a 5 out of 10, and only recommended if you're curious to see an otherwise fascinating experiment go kind of awry. Otherwise, our search for the next leaders in rock music might have to continue elsewhere. And that's a shame. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. If there's anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation or any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, I'd be more than happy to give them a listen. Just a friendly reminder, on July 10th, I'm going to be reviewing an album from 2014 on your request. So leave your suggestions in the comments, whether it's an album that came out last year that I already covered, or one that I just might have passed over. Make sure to tag it as 2014, and keep in mind, if you placed your comment across multiple videos, I am watching for it. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.